Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and of course, very happy to be in Austin, Texas. I serve as the 54th Secretary of the Interior. I'm a proud member of the Pueblo of Laguna in New Mexico. I was raised in a military family, and I raised an amazing child as a single mom. I'm a wife, a sister, an auntie, and a public servant. And I'm not supposed to be here. And what I mean by that is this country was built on principles and systems that were meant to either assimilate or exterminate people like me, to either make me blend into the background of America or get rid of me altogether. But against all odds, I am still here. The reality that I'm standing here as a figure of success, in spite of my history of tragedy and loss, is shared by many people in our country. We cannot deny that laws and policies in our not too distant past here in the United States were built on doctrines of enslavement, land grabbing, and discrimination. In fact, many states today, including right here in Texas, there are still efforts to strip people of their dignity, discriminate against them because of their identities, and marginalize them. Quite frankly, it's disgusting. And this is why I believe that representation matters, and why I think every single one of us has a role to play in taking the power of that representation to the next level. Think about this. The United States Department of the Interior was once the federal agency tasked with the forced assimilation of Indigenous people. In fact, a leader in this country described that process as a way to, and I quote, kill the Indian and save the man. It's not lost on me that I lead a department with that history, and that now Indigenous people everywhere have representation at the highest level of government, the presidential cabinet level. Today, we are in the room, at the table, and on the world stage. But this should be the norm, right? Every person in this country deserves to see themselves in leadership. When I was growing up, there weren't many women in elected office, and even fewer Indigenous people. How was I to know that this was even possible? The lack of representation sends a powerful message. It tells young people that these spaces aren't for them. It tells them that their lived experience isn't relevant, or maybe that they don't deserve to have a chance to be at the decision-making table. I will add that many adults subscribe to that thinking too. During my first campaign, when I ran for Lieutenant Governor of New Mexico, no one asked me to run, no one recruited me. It's likely because no one considered that an Indigenous woman could hold that seat or even put together a campaign, a successful campaign, because they'd never seen it done before. And when our ticket lost, I'm sure there were a lot of people who thought I would never run again. When I decided to run for Congress, I did what most candidates do. I called around to close friends and family and people who would give me their honest opinions. My close friends and family, they were ready to help, but many people across the country said it couldn't be done, that it would be impossible for a Native woman to raise enough money or win that type of election, especially given the fact that I was in a 6-way primary. Well, I'm here to tell everyone at this event and everyone joining online that not only can it be done, but that it must be done. Sometimes, thank you. Sometimes we just have to take the plunge because no one is going to ask people like me to lead, or at least it was that way for a very long time. But even if we fail, we make it just a little bit easier for the next person from a marginalized community who makes the effort after us. Lack of representation hasn't just meant that communities haven't had a say in policies that impact their lives, which is really awful enough. It also has tragic consequences that can be, as many of you know, life-threatening. Think about this. Last year, a national report found Black children ages 5 to 19, 5.5 more times likely to drown than white children. According to the USA Swimming Foundation, about 70% of Black children and 60% of Latino children don't know how to swim. And why do you think they don't know how to swim? It goes back to a history of exclusion, from being barred from city and public pools, from a lack of access to beaches and open water, from the growing disparities between people who have the time and the means to pay for swimming lessons or water sports and those who do not. From growing up in communities where experiencing the outdoors has felt out of reach because parents lack the resources for transportation or even admission costs. There is an intergenerational trauma from this legacy of disparity that still leads to higher rates of drowning among certain communities. I can't get those statistics out of my head. I can't stop thinking about how powerless I felt as a single parent, relying on public assistance and the grace and charity of others to make sure my child was not left behind. Or worse, was not put in danger. That's one of the realities that drives me in my work. It's one of the reasons we are doing everything we can to ensure kids have access to outdoor recreation, to rivers, to lakes, to mountains, and so much more, regardless of their zip codes. Yes, it will give communities a chance to benefit from the bounty of nature, but it also gives children the opportunity to learn about the land, to have access to our natural resources, to learn and respect and coexist with our environment. I believe that the foundation we build now will help young people today to become good stewards of our lands and waters, and hopefully keep more children safe. All of this is informed by the effort to center equity and exclusion in our work. The challenges our country faces, climate change, a global pandemic, economic uncertainty, and racial inequity can only be solved if marginalized communities have a voice, are respected, and are included in the solutions. Okay, so in Indigenous communities, pretty much everyone's an auntie, at least the women are aunties. Calling someone auntie is a sign of respect and an acknowledgement that aunties are there to teach us. We are all part of not only our pueblos, nations, tribes, or villages, but we are also part of our broader Indigenous family. So today, you are all my family, and I'm here as Auntie Deb. I'm here to share that knowledge, to go beyond what we know about equity and inclusion and representation, to empower each of you to be your own change maker. I mentioned earlier that we can't wait for someone to ask us to step up. We must be unafraid. We must be fierce. And often we have to jump feet first into being the first at anything. If we're lucky, there are times in history when someone from within the power structure truly understands the value of representation, when someone gives of their own power to lift up others who they know deserve to be heard. President Biden, a white man born during the time of Jim Crow, Japanese internment, farm worker exploitation, and forced assimilation, made space for a cabinet that looks like America. Marcia Fudge, a Black woman leading the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Miguel Cardona, a former teacher and the son of Puerto Rican parents leading the Department of Education. Michael Regan, Isabel Guzman, Lloyd Austin, Catherine Tai, Alejandro Mayorkas, and many more. And to top it off, Kamala Harris, the daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, serving as our first woman vice president. We are the most diverse cabinet in the history of our country. But it's not just about us sitting in a chair in the cabinet room at the White House, taking up a bunch of space It's about the conversations and the solutions that result when people can bring their whole selves, their diverse experiences, perspectives, and input to the table, and where each of us listens and learns from those perspectives. The government is responsible for serving communities that have been marginalized, but has rarely benefited from the input and experience of people who live in those communities. Like many people of color, I come from a community that has dealt with the decisions at the Interior Department and a federal government that didn't appreciate or respect our history, our culture, or our autonomy. All of that has led to environmental injustice. I know firsthand what it's like to have a toxic abandoned mine in my community. I've seen families struggle with health impacts of that and with the environmental degradation of what detonating dynamite every day for 30 years caused while the largest open pit uranium mine in the world was made right in my community. The company then simply abandoned it when it was no longer cost effective, and it took decades to remedy. There are stories of Black children with lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, because they have contaminated water, and Latino organizers in Southern California who went to school with tissues in their noses because of nosebleeds from toxic air quality. It's these stories that make me feel the importance of electing leaders who look more like them, because they will understand better what their communities go through, and they can be the change makers who take action. And that's why representation matters. It's not just because of who leadership is, but what they do with the power they wield. For too long, these issues have been brushed aside. The fact that not every community can get up and move every time there's a toxic spill, water treatment failures, or even environmental disasters is too often forgotten. But let me tell you, the time for change is right now. With the transformational bipartisan infrastructure law in place, we're focusing on addressing legacy pollution in the way that acknowledges the full picture of environmental injustice. We're addressing lead pipes and clean drinking water, lack of broadband access, roads, bridges, crumbling schools, and infrastructure. For many of us, the struggle for equal access to government resources and taxpayer investments, it isn't new. It's why I truly believe that every person in this country should know our full history, our triumphs, our struggles, our progress, and where we have fallen short. Because we will only change our future when we recognize what needs to be changed and when we say the words out loud. Last month, I went to Mississippi to visit the home of Medgar and Merle Evers. The refrigerator in the kitchen of the Evers home was one that I could remember seeing in my own family's home growing up. The children's twin beds reminded me of my and my siblings' beds in many of the houses that we lived in. And then I saw the bullet holes in the wall, and I could feel the horror of a family targeted in their own home just because they wanted to live in a world where the color of their skin didn't determine what restroom or school they could go to, or whether or not they could vote. When we're able to see how similar we are to each other, yet how differently we experience the world, we learn to appreciate the unique hardships people go through and understand that historical marginalization puts entire communities behind. When I saw those bullet holes and listened to the Evers' daughter, Rena, recount her memories, it reminded me of the stories my grandma would share about being taken away from her home by a government-sanctioned Catholic boarding school when she was only 8 years old. It's a history that not many people know about right here in the United States, that young Indigenous children were stolen from their homes and taken to schools run by the federal government, sometimes by the Department of the Interior. Those schools had one purpose: to assimilate Indigenous children. They took their clothes, they cut their hair, and beat them when they spoke their traditional languages. As I mentioned, to kill the Indian and save the man. It's a sad and traumatic part of my history. It is something that still haunts communities, from those who survived boarding schools to those who were raised by those survivors, often living every day with the horrors of that experience and passing on that trauma from generation to generation. The term for that is generational trauma, and it's real. But you don't have to just take my word for it. Far too many communities in our country experience generational trauma on a daily basis. I recently visited a former Japanese internment camp. The survivors and their descendants described how that long-term imprisonment impacted them when they went home, how their parents and grandparents were never the same, and passed down the trauma to them. It doesn't really ever get easier to talk about these periods in American history, but when we talk about them, we can help communities to heal. It's why I launched the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative to investigate the full scope of forced assimilation practices at those schools to help Indigenous communities get answers and support resources so they can continue to heal. The question we have to consider is this: would someone who hasn't directly experienced this trauma move these issues forward? Would they know to prioritize the necessary healing in order to accomplish those goals? The answer is maybe. But when leadership has those perspectives and can lead with empathy based on shared experiences, the answer to that question is definitely. This is why representation matters. President Biden has tasked every federal agency to use a lens of equity and inclusion in the work that they do, to center the voices of those who have been marginalized or underrepresented. It's much easier to ground our path toward equity and inclusion if there are leaders at the table who have those experiences. And just as a lack of representation has an impact on how effective leadership is, the presence of representation opens the doors of opportunity for others to follow. Not only do young people now see figures from their communities serving at the highest levels of government, the policies and solutions that are developed will break down the barriers that were meant to keep them out. This is why representation matters. This is also why one of my personal goals is to leave the ladder down behind me for more people to climb. And then, when they do climb that ladder, I will lift them up on my shoulders so that they can climb even higher. This is my responsibility because that's what my ancestors did for me. I challenge everyone here to do the same. That's the key to fully realizing equity and inclusion. It doesn't just stop with us. This process must outlive us. So here it is, my South by Southwest family. I am going to give you Auntie Deb's guide to equity and inclusion. First, for people who come from marginalized communities, don't be afraid to be the first and don't wait for someone to ask you. Step onto the stage and don't worry about failing, because just showing up is part of the work and it moves all of us a little bit closer to where we need to be. Shirley Chisholm, one of my heroes, was the first Black woman to serve in Congress, and in fact, I was elected 50 years after she was. What you may not know is that she also ran for president. She broke down barriers so that more women could run and eventually win. Second, use any bit of power you have, and believe me, anyone at any level, every single person in this room has power to make room for diverse voices that can take the lead. I mean, think about the room of people preparing for the Montgomery bus boycotts. Everyone gathered, everyone had a role, everyone knew what was at stake, and everyone worked together as a team to decide together in the planning, and they executed that mission incredibly successfully. It requires a great deal of humility to admit that you don't know everything, and that someone's lived experience can be just as valuable as a degree or a resume. But recognizing that will help build more equitable and inclusive solutions, and it will help ensure that more people who look like America are around the table to make the best decisions for America. Lift people up. Third, learn our country's full history. It's each of our obligation to go beyond what school curricula teaches us. Our full history is deep and will require us to ask questions that make us uncomfortable, but will lead us to better understand people's lived experiences without judgment. Listen more than you talk. When you see a disparity, the communities fighting for clean drinking water, breathing in toxic fumes, keeping their children safe in the outdoors, stop and think about why that disparity exists. If you can't figure it out, don't stop there. Seek out ways to help shine a light on it. Do the work to dig into root causes and build solutions that have empathy. Fourth, be fierce. This is long and hard work that requires passion and determination. Native American fishing rights activist Billy Frank fought for 30 years to make sure his people had the right to fish on their ancestral homelands. Your truths, your experiences are incredibly valuable. We can all benefit from sharing more of our whole selves. And last, leave the ladder down for more people to climb. Human rights activist Dolores Huerta is still fighting for human rights 60 years after she started. Even at 92 years old, she's training the next generation of activists, helping women run for office, lifting people up on her shoulders so they can have a voice in our future. And there you have it. Tell everyone you know that Auntie Deb says that we all have a role in making sure that equity and inclusion are not just taglines or empty promises, that representation truly does matter. So step up, stand tall, and be fierce. Thank you. Thank you all so much. You're very, very kind. But it's not over yet. So now I have the opportunity, the profound opportunity, to put my words into action. To help facilitate the question and answer portion of our program, I'd like to invite someone to the stage who has been advocating for equity and inclusion for many years. She is bold, she is fierce, and I am so proud to share the stage with her today. Please welcome Charlotte Clymer, writer, transgender activist, military veteran, and somebody I admire a whole bunch.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I so appreciate you. When you were nominated, it was a feeling of great relief and joy, because we don't just need representation, we need substance behind representation. We need people from communities who are going to be fierce and righteous in that approach and allow for space for good faith mistakes and allow for good faith discussion. And when you were nominated, it was a breath of fresh air, and I am so honored to be on the stage with you today. So let's give one more hand to Secretary Haaland, please. I love Texas. I love it. I love this state so much. This is where my family has lived for generations. It's where I grew up. It's where I graduated high school. It's where I enlisted in the military just a few miles down the road. And Texas is where I first learned about kindness and decency. I don't know where my family would be right now were it not for the kindness of strangers and the strength of community in Texas. I don't know. I really don't. Last spring, I was walking on Capitol Hill in DC, down Pennsylvania, and there was this anti-LGBTQ protester, which is not uncommon on the street corner there, ranting and raving. As I passed by him, he says some really unkind things, some very not so nice things. And I kept walking because I just didn't have time for it. And some of these folks you should just ignore and not give them attention. But I get, I don't know, a minute or so down the street, and all of a sudden this car pulls up next to me. And I'm startled, of course. And the window rolls down, and this gentleman pops his head out of the door, and he says, Don't listen to him. Do not listen to him. You are lovingly made in the image of God. Do not listen to him. And I didn't know what to say, so I said thanks, and I was about to ask his name, and he rolled his window up and took down the road. It was random, and it made me incredibly homesick. Because even though it happened in DC, it reminded me so much of Texas. It reminded me of that mindset of community, of reaching out to people, even those with whom you disagree, even those with whom you don't share the same worldview. I have observed over the past several years, but especially over the past several weeks, a very depressing and disgusting and uncharacteristic incongruence between the Texas that I know and love and the actions of Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton. I don't think they know any trans people. I think y'all would agree, wouldn't you? Yep. And I sure as hell bet I know more Republicans than they know trans people. I sure as hell bet that I know more conservatives and am friends with more conservatives and folks who may not align with this perfectly than they know trans people. Because I've done the work to reach out to people with whom I disagree, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts, even when I have days when I just want to give up, I still do that outreach. Because I'm from Texas, and that's what we do. I have been to too many Friday high school football games. I have been to too many church services. I have been to too many barbecues, had too many discussions with people who don't see the world as I do, and had that kind of exchange where it leads to greater understanding, it leads to greater learning, to believe that we can't bring each other together. I don't think that Greg Abbott believes in Texans. I don't. I think he has no faith in the people of this state. Why else would he circumvent the legislature and unilaterally attempt to ban kids, trans kids, from receiving gender-affirming health care? Health care that has been endorsed by the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and on and on and on. Every single medical authority has come out and said that not only is gender-affirming care necessary, but it is life-saving. Life-saving. So why is this man going around the representatives of the people and attempting to rip away kids from parents for no reason other than his own fear and bigotry? If you can answer that question for me, then you're way smarter than I am. Because I don't know. I really don't. I would like to believe it is not an effort to, I would say, gain an advantage in the midterms, but I don't know. Because every expert on this has made it absolutely clear that kids need access to gender-affirming care. Trans kids, non-binary kids, and their families have to make these decisions with medical practitioners. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's what the medical experts say. Last month, a study was released by the Journal of the American Medical Association, and this study said that gender-affirming care leads to a 73% decrease in suicidal ideation among trans and non-binary kids. 73%. If this were any other medical treatment, its greatest leaders in that field would be on the cover of Time magazine. They would be celebrated. They would be feted for saving children, for preventing children from harming themselves, preventing families from going through that kind of pain. 73% decrease. And this man wants to take that away for no other reason than his own selfishness and cynicism. So here's what I have to say to the folks of Texas, this state that I love. I know that some of you are afraid of making mistakes. I know that some of you are afraid of saying the wrong thing. I know that a lot of you are just new to this thing and you're not sure where this comes from. I can tell you this, I too am afraid of making mistakes. I too am afraid of saying the wrong thing sometimes. And then I do make mistakes because mistakes are inevitable. That's what it means to be a human being, is to make mistakes and learn from them. But we have to do that learning. I want you all to open your hearts. I want y'all to look at these kids and ask yourselves, is it more important to prop up this dangerous and cynical man in the governor's mansion? Or is it more important to stand behind kids and their families who are wondering if they should waste a fortune in moving outside the state because they no longer see safety for their own children? We have to do everything we can to prevent that. Everything. I'm taking up a lot of space right now, and so I'll end with this. A couple days ago, I was listening to Beto O'Rourke as he talked to the Texas Tribune, and he said something along the lines of the fact that we have a failed power grid in the state, and we have COVID, and we have all these other problems that Texans face. Real honest-to-God problems. My grandmother had to stay in a hotel for a month, a cheap motel, because she couldn't afford anything else, while her home, her very cheap home in South Austin, was repaired from a failed grid system. Beto O'Rourke wants us to believe in each other, and I think we should believe in each other. I think that we're capable of that. So folks, please believe in each other. Please protect trans children. Please make your voices loud and clear to this governor that Texans are going to bet on each other. We're going to bring each other together, and we're going to build community and learn with each other and evolve with each other, because that's what we do. That is what we do best. Thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here. And I cannot wait to have this Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Very wonderful.
Oh, wow. Gotta put my glasses on. Madam Secretary.
Good to see you.
We had breakfast tacos this morning.
Indeed.
They were delicious.
That's what you should do in Austin, Texas, right?
That's right. What was the restaurant we were? It was a food truck, right?
Yes.
Radio
Veracruz.
Yeah, Veracruz. That's right. Delicious. Absolutely delicious. If you don't mind me asking, Madam Secretary,
yes.
You are the parent of a non-binary child.
Indeed.
And what has that experience been like for you and your family?
Well, I can tell you that my most favorite thing in the entire world is being a mom. And so we talked about this too. I get emotional when I think about my child. My favorite thing, of course, is being a mom. And so I just feel, with respect to what you said, it is like you just need to love your children. Just need to love your children.
I've cried so much over the last 3 weeks. I keep thinking of that 12-year-old trans girl in the closet somewhere in Central Texas, because there was a lot of them, believe it or not. 130,000 estimated trans non-binary children, both out and in the closet in the state of Texas, and their families. And I keep thinking about that young trans girl who wants to come out, who wants to talk to her parents, wants to get that health care she needs, but she's afraid that if she does, the governor is going to take her away from her parents. What has that been like to witness?
Well, of course, that's fear. That is very fearful. Like, those fears are real, right? And I mean, I definitely. I mean, look, I can talk about how my child actually did or didn't come out to me. Of course, we have a great relationship. When my child came out to me, they didn't really come out to me. I found out from someone else that my child, she was identifying as gay at the time. When I asked her about it at the time, Soma said, "Why should I have to tell you I'm gay? Do kids sit their parents down and tell them they're heterosexual?" And I was like, "No." I get your point's taken, okay? But I guess what I hope is that any parent of any non-binary, trans, gay individual, child will just love their children enough to understand and try to get them the help they need regardless. I think the love has to outweigh the fear.
The love has to outweigh the fear. Oh, that's gorgeous. I think that a lot of folks think that trans people happened overnight because we've had increased visibility in recent years. But trans people have been found in every country, every culture, every religion, every ethnicity, every region, all over the world for thousands of years, going back to antiquity. In recorded human history, trans people can be found everywhere. You've talked a little bit about the history of trans folks in Native communities. Would you like to tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think in a lot of Native communities, trans people, LGBTQ plus people have been lifted up by their Indigenous communities. The term two-spirit, those are people who have a special place in those communities. Thinking of one individual in the Zuni Pueblo who I read about, VAWA. I think the anthropologists, I won't even say that term. That person was lifted up because they had special gifts. They loved the children. Everyone trusted that person with their children. They weave beautiful belts and made shoes and all of these things that were of value to the community. And I think the bottom line in communities like mine, Pueblo communities, it's all of us working together to that end. And whatever somebody would like to contribute, those gifts to the community just further us. And back then, survival was tough, right? Everyone had to do their part to make sure that everyone survived. And it would have been terrible to disavow anyone of any gifts that they wanted to offer to the community.
I'm trying very hard not to cry, and you're making it very hard, Madam Secretary. I'm going to take some questions from the audience. Let me see. You've mentioned that Indian country is in a new era. Do you have confidence that this era will outlive your leadership?
Well, of course, my hope is absolutely yes, and I feel that some of the decisions that we're making will continue for generations to come. I'll give one example. The bipartisan infrastructure laws making it possible for us to connect Indian country with broadband internet. If you can believe that there are some tribal governments that operate on dial-up because they don't have the infrastructure they need to run their governments in a 21st century way. So connecting tribes to the internet, making sure that they have the new technology they need to move forward, that will absolutely outlive me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love that optimism. We need more of that. For inclusion, how do we address the invisible inequities like learning disabilities, mental health issues, and other neurodiversities that are hidden handicaps?
Well, I'll tell you that at the Department of the Interior, we have an entire office that is dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that, it says it all, right? We want everyone to have opportunities. And the more we talk about those things, the more they see the light of day. It's kind of what I was saying in my speech. We all have to know our own history. We all have to know what these challenges that each other are facing so that we can find remedies to those challenges and make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
Leave no one behind.
Leave no one behind.
I just want to really quickly note that I have such great appreciation for disabled activists and disability activists. I mean, they have really shown up for every single other community, just been on the front lines for racial justice, for LGBTQ folks, for religious minorities. If you go to a protest, you're going to see a disability activist there. You will. They show up every single time, and we need to be showing up for them more.
Absolutely. And I could say with respect to, for example, the National Park Service, which is under the Department of the Interior, we all work very hard to make sure that places are accessible to disabled folks. My mother, she used a wheelchair for the last 5 years of her life, and I wheeled her around a few parks, and she got to enjoy everything the same way that I would enjoy it. And that's what we really want, is for these spaces to be open to every single person, if that's where they choose to go.
And thank you, by the way, to South by Southwest. My grandmother attended a session a couple days ago that I was at, and on very short notice, we let them know, hey, could you help us? Because not only is she hard of hearing, but she also has a mobility disability. And they were wonderful in making the process seamless, for making sure she got safely to the session, was able to safely leave. So I really appreciate the folks here for making that possible. President Biden signed the Violence Against Women Act. Well, he reauthorized it into law today. What does this law mean for women and gender minorities?
Well, I'm so grateful that President Biden was able to sign VAWA into law today, the reauthorization, because of course he championed that law when it was first enacted. You know, part of me, I fought for this when I was a member of Congress. Part of me is saying, why did it take so long? Right? I mean, who is against protecting women against violence? You might ask yourself, but you know, again, there are folks out there who don't necessarily put the safety of women first. But nonetheless, the safety of women is put first today because President Biden signed that into law. And we were very grateful to see that there were some provisions for Native American women in that law, you know, marginalized, underrepresented women who need to also be protected. And so I'm very grateful. There are a lot of people who have fought long and hard to make this reauthorization a reality. And so I'm just grateful that our country is moving forward. And this is a big deal. It is, President Biden truly cares about this issue. And so, yes, very grateful.
I'm grateful that President Biden has refused to back down on including trans women and really the entire trans non-binary community in VAWA. Yeah, please do clap for that. Whatever your critiques of President Biden, I'm sure that folks in here have many. He has been resolute on trans rights, refused to back down, not giving an inch. And that included VAWA. Many lawmakers wanted to strip out protections for trans folks and the Indigenous community, and he wasn't having it. And now we have the reauthorization that includes everybody, that doesn't leave anybody behind, that protects folks. So thank you to President Biden and his entire team, and of course, to his cabinet. I like this question because I've been wondering this myself a lot lately about you, Madam Secretary.
Okay.
What will you do after serving as Secretary?
Thank you for the question. And I mean, look, right now, I'm busy every single day. And busy to make sure that, you know, in reference to the earlier question, the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to keep me busy and all of our team at the Department of the Interior busy for a very long time. And so I'll be honest with you, I care so deeply about moving our country to a renewable energy economy. That transition is so important to me. It's important for me to make sure that we are conserving land for future generations, that we're making these spaces accessible. So I am just going to concentrate on my job at the Interior because I truly do love it. Thank you.
Carolyn Howe has a really great question. On your point about parks and accessibility, how do you see the National Park Service transforming to welcome more BIPOC staff and communities in all the ways we can use our parks?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have an entire office at the Department of the Interior dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion. And so you can bet that is work that we are really moving forward every single day. So we will get there, wherever it is we need to be.
Matt Herman asked a question I've been wondering a lot lately too. How do we get past the partisan divide that exists in our country?
So I will say that when I was a member of Congress, I got 4 bills passed and signed into law by a Republican president. And it's because those bills were bipartisan. It's because like you were talking about in your remarks, right? You reach across the aisle. You find the things that you can agree on, and you work in those spaces. I feel very strongly that we can agree on more than we disagree, and we absolutely need to find those things. And sometimes, you know, there are folks who are serving the public that truly do want to serve the public and don't just want to get reelected.
Can I emphasize that real quick? Because I feel there's a lot of cynicism about DC right now, understandable cynicism, but we both know many elected officials in the district and of course all across the country who really are committed to public service and are committed to that public policy process, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just a rare thing. I mean, there are a lot of folks who do the good work and are there who come ready to represent the people. And I wish people had more faith in Congress. And I know that's a controversial thing to say lately. I get it, but there really are people fighting the good fight. Barry McGuff, Barry, I hope I pronounced your last name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. Barry asks, during your cabinet confirmation process, do you feel you were able to be candid with opposing senators? And how much do you think your perspective was heard?
So I appreciate the question. And of course, the confirmation process is a little grueling, right? It's a little scary to sit there and sort of you're by yourself and there's a whole panel of people asking you questions. Yes, some are friendly, some are not so friendly. I think the point about a confirmation, I mean, that's part of it, right? See, how do you hold up under pressure? Are you going to crack, or are you just going to be consistent and move forward with your ideas and how you feel you can make the department work or make the department better or serve the American people? So I felt that I answered all the questions the way I felt, the way I truly felt, and it looks like they agreed with me as a whole. So here I am.
Thank God, thank God. Here's a great question. I really like this one. How do we expand the outdoors for people who can't afford admission to national parks?
Well, I have good news for everyone here that National Wildlife Refuges are free.
Woo.
And so anyone can go to a National Wildlife Refuge, and some of the National Wildlife Refuges, urban National Wildlife Refuges, are close to urban centers. They're close for kids to be able to take field trips to those places. You can see birds migrating. At one I went to in Maryland just last week, we saw owls, we saw bald eagles, and tundra swans. It was really amazing and beautiful. So I just want to put that plug in for our National Wildlife Refuges. We have a program in the National Park Service where veterans can get free admission to our national parks. I recognize that, as I mentioned in my remarks, that some places, parents, if they can't necessarily afford, to drive 200 miles to take their kids to a national park plus pay the admission, sometimes parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, and it's difficult for them to even take a family vacation. Whenever I have visited a national park in my job, I am always, I get emotional about seeing the career staff there, because it might be the only trip that a family is able to take, right, in an entire year. And they are there ready to make sure that that family has a wonderful time and remembers their time in that national park that they're working at. We want to make these places accessible. Public land should be accessible to every single American, and so we are going to work harder at that, but certainly National Wildlife Refuges, awesome.
And by the way, if you are a veteran, there are many programs at your local veterans hospital or center where they'll pay for transportation, the whole bit, to go visit a national park. It's really cool. I've done it. It's an amazing program, so look that up. And also, and because I'm just such a nerd on this subject, y'all need to watch Ken Burns' documentary series, National Parks. It's incredible. It is sublime. If you just want to detox away from our fraught political environment and really be inspired, watch Ken Burns' documentary series in National Parks. It's incredible. Okay, I'll be quiet now and move on. Eileen Ottenweller asks, what has been the most surprising thing you've learned since taking your role as Secretary of the Interior? And I'm sure there are many surprising things.
Well, let's see. I won't say this as surprising, but as I'm always in awe of the career staff who serve at the Department of the Interior. We have 60,000 or so employees, and in my first few months as secretary, I signed a congratulatory retirement letter for one of our career staff who served at the department for 62 years.
Wow.
And so
clap for that.
Yes,
wow.
Clap for that person. So we have staff who make their careers out of conservation. I mean, there are scientists who study the smallest little organism swimming in a stream. We have people who lead, groups of volunteers. It is really quite incredible. And sometimes when you talk to these people, you might ask them, why were you inspired to go into public service this way, right? Why were you inspired to have a job that conserves these natural resources? And sometimes people will talk about having a father who is a scientist or a conservationist. Other people will just say, because I love critters. And so that's awesome. And that's why we want more kids to get out in nature, because they will also be inspired to go into those fields. We're in a climate crisis right now, and it's sort of an all-hands-on-deck moment. And so we're incredibly grateful to have the career staff we do at the department, and we need to make sure that we're inspiring the next generation of conservationists, scientists, water experts, folks who understand drought and resilience and all of these things, so that we can keep this all going.
Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec, the character from Parks and Rec, is just, by the way, one of my favorite characters ever, hands down, But near the end of the series, she becomes a senior official in the Interior Department, and she's just full of enthusiasm and zest, and is really committed to bettering the lives of other people. And I swear, everyone I've come into contact with in Interior is like that, is in that vein. What is it about the department you lead that kind of, encourages or nourishes that unbridled enthusiasm for just not only our country, but the folks that your department serves?
It's joyous. I mean, some people are like, this is my office, right? They're out in the middle of these great big redwoods every day. People go into service for various reasons. And like so many people are different, but all of it is amazing, and I'm just very grateful to have the career staff that we have at the Interior. They're all amazing.
I have a dear friend of mine. Several years ago, she graduated from college, and I for sure thought she was going to go to law school and then just have that path into politics, because that's the kind of person she is. And she really surprised everybody and did a left turn and became a park ranger. And she plans to retire as a park ranger. That is, she loves it. She can't get enough of it. She's not going to politics anymore. She loves that area of public service. And I don't know, there's something so wonderful about that makes me, it just makes me so excited and giddy when we talk about the folks that work for you and then try to make our country a better place. So thank you for that.
Indeed, indeed. And so the next time you're in a national park or a wildlife, ask the staff there, why are you doing this? Why did you choose this as your profession? And they'll give you the greatest stories, and you'll feel so happy when you leave there.
What are we doing along the lines of the overall makeup of the Interior Department to increase representation of marginalized communities?
We are bringing those folks into the conversations we have. And I'll just say, for example, tribal consultation is a priority of the Biden administration. And not only does the Department of the Interior, we have the Bureau of Indian Affairs in our department, but not only are we making sure that we're consulting with tribes for issues that involve them, but all the departments across the administration are also consulting with tribes before they make decisions. Look, everybody needs to have a seat at the table. It's important that, that we all recognize that our public lands belong to every single American. Everybody deserves to have a seat at the table.
One more question. From Mohawk journalist Vincent Schilling, editor of Native Viewpoint, how does it feel to be the first Native Secretary of the Interior, and why did it take so long?
Thank you, Vince. It's nice to hear from you. So it feels amazing, and I'll just say that I am very honored to serve. I am incredibly honored to serve. I was incredibly honored when President President-elect Biden called me to ask me if I would serve. And I will just say that, you know, I get people, Native folks from all over the country who tell me they're praying for me. They send me notes. We're praying for you. We keep you in our morning prayers. We put down tobacco for you. We offer cornmeal for you. I truly believe that all of that energy is, that helps me an incredible amount. So I don't ever take for granted that I have the support from Indian country and from folks across the country that I essentially need. Why did it take so long? I don't know. I honestly, as I said, I was one of the first 2 Native women in Congress after 232 years. Why did that take so long? It wasn't really for lack of trying. There were a lot of Native women who ran for Congress before I decided to run. But for whatever reason, our country, were we ready? Maybe we weren't ready. My slogan when I ran for Congress was, "Congress has never heard a voice like mine," and so now it has, and now the cabinet secretary has heard a voice like mine, I guess. So, I guess the point, it isn't, why did it take so long? Now it's, I'm the first, but I hope that I'm not the last.
And we're all the better for it. Madam Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you.